There's Micah.
Okay, now it should be going.
Hello, everybody. It's the anticipated interview with Scott Stafne, running in CD1, which is around the Arlington, Marysville area. It's adjacent to CD2, of course. And it's our pleasure to introduce Scott Stafne. Welcome, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We apologize to anybody that in advance that the stream is a little bit laggy right now. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. That's what this is a Q&A, to be able to get to know Scott and to actually ask the big question that everybody's wondering: why are you running as a Republican?
I'm running as a Republican because Trump early on started attacking our courts, and I believe our court system is our biggest problem. I'm also running as a Republican because when I look around, there is no group that really stands for the principles that I stand for. So you have to go kind of back in history. And when I look at history, I see that it was the Lincoln Republicans that actually made a lot of progress. The Lincoln Republicans were replaced by the Democrats in I believe it was 1882, and they started discriminating against the blacks through Jim Crow laws, the Chinese, and a lot of these issues have come up for me in the cases I'm now bringing before the courts, which are that we need better representation. We need people. I shouldn't be having to go out and try to convince 730,000 people to elect me. The people should have the benefit, and I believe at about the 50,000 mark, to have me serve them. I mean, it's almost impossible to serve 1 million people. You really need to know your constituents, and that was the purpose Congress was supposed to serve. And by Congress, I mean the House of Representatives, because originally the senators were elected by the state legislators. So it was up to the representatives to serve the people who lived in their district, not just the voters.
And that brings up sort of another reason why you're running, right? Is the Congressional apportionment amendment. And you were, I believe, one of the first ones to really start talking about it, and even got Tyler involved. Is that correct?
Yeah, Tyler and I've talked about it, and it's not an amendment. What happened was we got rid of, we had senators elected by the people. It used to be that apportionment was for purposes of the states paying taxes and for determining the number of representatives. So after the Civil War, we got rid of the restrictive apportionment because blacks were no longer apportioned at 3 people or 5. And what happened in the 1900s is we gave women the right to vote, we had given black the right to vote, and we never increased representation. And once they were able to pass an amendment allowing the income tax, what happened was the government then passed the Federal Reserve, and they were able to finance their various shenanigans through borrowing debt, which helped the bankers and the Federal Reserve, and we had to pay it back. And at that point, essentially, they stopped increasing representation. So we never got any more Congress people after that. So what we have done is we have expanded the vote to all sorts of people. And in the 70s, we expanded it to people older than 18, but we've never increased representation. In the 1920s, Congress didn't even perform its constitutional responsibility to, based on the census, apportion it. And finally thereafter, what they did was they said, okay, we're going to leave it at 435, and no matter how large the country grows, and no matter how many voters, we're only going to give the people 435 representatives. And that's not how our founders intended it to be. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense to me. I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there that get a little confused, basically because the history books and what we've been taught in school kind of contradicts that, right? So there is a question real quick, though, that I wanted to get to. It's on the Facebook chat from Carol Wilson, and she wants to know, what are the principles that you stand for? And I think that this is kind of a good segue into that.
So the primary principle I stand for is that a representative should serve the people in the district he represents. He should serve his constituents. So that means that while I may have certain views and hold them very strongly, I will attempt, and I've been thinking about it because it may take putting a lot of my salary into finding avenues of communication with the constituents in CD1 so that I can represent their views and engage in dialogue with them. Now, the only caveat to that is I will do what is constitutionally appropriate. So if the majority would want to do something that violates my oath of office, my oath to the Constitution, I would stick with the Constitution. Other principles, what I believe, I'm in favor of universal health care. I'm in favor of increased representation. I'm in favor of legislative oversight over court corruption. And of course, as a representative, I would have more oversight over federal judges, and Congress would, but they also have oversight over under the 14th Amendment, over state courts when they get to the point that they're so out of whack, they're violating the 14th Amendment. And you probably have other questions. The three big issues that I am campaigning on is increasing representation so that the people are adequately represented in this country, so that we no longer have an aristocracy and an oligarchy. 2, eliminating court corruption. And 3, getting rid of debt slavery. And as part of that, I really want to audit the Federal Reserve, and I'm certainly not opposed to getting rid of that entity.
Can I expand a little bit more?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Do you support private prisons?
Against them, and I'm against TUI in prison too. I'd like to see more bankers and sociopaths that commit offenses against the people and cause people great harm. I'd like to see them in prison, and I don't believe we should have people in prison for petty drug offenses. I believe our prisons are being used as a means of slavery right now.
Thank you. Let's see. Trying to think of any some other things that can be when people see you running as a Republican, they make assumptions. So I want to dispel those assumptions. There have been raised concerns about, are you familiar with ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council?
No. So if you've got questions about them and their positions, please tell me their position and I'll tell you how I feel on them.
Well, they're more of it's a scenario in which companies, industry come together, write legislation, and then hand it off to the elected officials that they pay to represent them. And then usually it's Republicans who then submit, like they fill out their name and the state, if you're even lucky. Sometimes it doesn't, they just turn in the paper and they pass legislation that's written by industry. And so there's people who are concerned that as a blanket statement, that's what Republicans do. And so we want to put their mind at ease that you're not already in their pocket because you don't even know who they are. So perfect.
Okay. But not only that, that is not something I would do. I find that abhorrent because look what's happened with the opioid crisis. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies went to Congress and bought all their votes and stopped the DEA from going after these. And these are the type of people I'd like to see in prison. The corporations that were sending millions of opioids to small towns like the size of 300 people, and not one incumbent voted against them. I mean, that actually, I think, indicts all of the Congress people out there. Who are they representing when they are watching a genocide of people going on, kind of being fueled by our pharmaceutical companies, and they do nothing about it. Instead, they promote it. I find that I couldn't even believe it when I heard it. Not one congressman or senator, no matter how much we may like some of them, voted against it. And that bill was completely written by the corporations and the pharmaceutical companies. And the pharmaceutical companies, are very problematic. They hurt our healthcare. They hurt our nation. I mean, as a nation, we can't even afford the drugs that other nations get at far less cost. I think that has to be changed. And whether or not I win or lose, it's not about me. It's about getting the country on the right path. And it's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about electing the people that will get us there. Because we have how people define themselves at a moment in time is not the issue. It's how they vote and how they are going to serve their constituents that is the true issue. Like, one of the things I'm doing is I won't take any money at all, whether I get through the primaries or not. If I get through the primaries, I'm not going to take money to run against Susan Delbaney. I will be there and people could vote for me. And the idea is, once we start getting people elected who don't have to put money in, then it becomes about the people. And we need that type of representation, because right now what we get is people lie to us during the campaigns, and then they don't follow through. And we've got to stop that. we don't want sugarcoating. So what I'm doing is I've got all my stuff out there. I put out a lot of material. I've been around since 2012 doing it. So people know where I stand. It's not like I'm trying to feed anybody anything that they can't check up on.
Right. Can I ask a question here? So just for
Sure.
some of the audience coming in later. So first off, is there any of the 2016 Bernie platform that you're not aligned with? And if so, what is that and why?
Second Amendment. And the reason for that is, and I used to be, I mean, when I was younger. And then I had a friend that was pretty much pro Second Amendment, and he asked me why. And, you know, I gave the reasons that people give today for being pro gun control, and those are good reasons. But the problem is, I believe that I am more endangered by our government and governmental tyranny than I am by criminals and the mentally ill. I watch the people that have created the big prisons, the people who create the opioid epidemic, and I say, wait a minute. And I look at history again, and I'm kind of a buff on history. You know, my dad was too, and it wasn't until I got a lot older that I started paying more attention. But what happens is in China, in Germany, what they always do just before they totally take over is they take away the guns. Now, I'm not saying that the people can fight the government with their guns. I'm just saying I want the government to be aware that there are people out there that don't care for the tyranny, and we've got guns, and we're not necessarily going to cave as they euthanize our neighbors.
Okay, and then some people were a little later, so again, they just wanted to straight up answer why run as a Republican, which I know we did talk about, and not under another, but also some other talk I've seen out there is people worried about, you know, the control of our house. So can you just discuss that, you know, because they're worried about Republicans keeping control versus Dems and all that good stuff?
Yes, I can. So when I looked at where the Republicans were and where the Democrats were and where the independents were and where the Libertarians were and where the Greens were and where all of these different organizations were, I came to the decision after talking with numerous folks that if I was going to run for office and have a chance, that I would run as a Lincoln Republican because I fit in there. And in the work I've done in California, I've also worked with the folks that the Frederick Douglass Republicans as well, and I forget exactly their name this second, but I mean, I came to the conclusion that I supported Trump's attacks on the courts. Since he's been around, I am in support of his kind of stirring up the separation of powers, meaning that the idea of our country was that the three branches of government would fight among themselves the better to promote liberty, as would the states and the federal government. I mean, what they did is they created a number of various entities that were supposed to fight to protect the people's freedom. Well, what has happened, in my view, is all the branches have been bought by the same people. And now we have a government that is actually working against its people. And I would prefer that that not be the case. Now let's talk about if I get elected and if I get to Congress. If I get elected and get to Congress, I will caucus with the Republicans. But as I promised, I will vote or do my very best to find out and to vote the will of the constituents in my district. And the reason I will do that is because that is what a congressional representative is supposed to do.
Thank you. Brian, do you see any more questions out there? I want to make sure we grab any. Courtney?
I don't see any outside, but for me, and sometimes it's not just a why for something, but why not something else. So you can answer why not a Democrat, why not an independent, why not a Libertarian? Would you approach it from that?
I did. So the last time we talked, what I explained is how I look at issues myself is with the concept of liberty. And I believe that everyone in this nation should have liberty or freedom and be citizens reflecting that freedom in who we elect, who we appoint, and that sort of thing. So when I look at what it takes to have liberty, I start with the assumption that you have to have a healthy, educated citizenry. And so when we look at, when I look at what is the responsibility of government, I start with the proposition that we need a healthy citizenry and an educated citizenry. And I don't mean educated so people can do jobs. I mean educated so people can be good citizens and be able to communicate to their representatives what they want and to know, exactly where they're going. So when I look at those things, that and I thought, and I am a social libertarian, but when I looked at the libertarians and I did a lot of questioning, is I don't see how the economic system we have now, which they call crony capitalism, and which is crony capitalism, I don't see how that's ever going to produce an educated and healthy citizenry. I mean, the problem is when everything is about money, then what they're doing now is they just let people die. There's no health care if you can't afford it. You have to get kicked out of your house if you can't afford it. And we have no safety net. And we are engaged, I believe, in a genocide, a governmental genocide against the people of this country. And I don't see how people who have their eyes open can come to any other conclusion.
Well, thank you.
Did I answer your question? Was I able to answer your question?
Yes, I sorry, I got a little distracted with some chat discussion. But there is a question. Do you but yes, you did answer like why not a libertarian, and that is perfect. Thank you. And
I can answer why not a Democrat too. And why not a Democrat is because when you look throughout history, Democrats have been the ones that have oftentimes just blatantly told the people what they wanted to hear and then lied. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've got the progressive movement and the Bernie-crats. I mean, it was the Democratic Party that went after the Bernie-crats. So the Democrats, I think, are problematic. I was reading this book for a case that I'm working on. It's called Hitler's American Model. And what it talks about is when Hitler came to power, he got all the lawyers in Germany together. And what they did was they studied the United States, our Jim Crow laws, our eugenic laws, and they did so because they used our laws and our legal system as the basis for theirs. Now, people may not like to hear it, but it's true. And I mean, we really need to realize that as part of our history. We need to, when you wonder what were the Germans thinking at the time that the genocide was going on, you know, people are going to be wondering what we were thinking with all these 10 cities, with evicting these 70, 80-year-old people. I mean, we've got to open our eyes and see things. I mean, it's time. It's beyond time.
Totally agree. We have Laura Fielding out watching in Facebook land. So she says she came late. Where do you stand? And we know this, but where do you stand on single payer Medicare for all? As she understands it, the conservative case for single payer is growing. Do you believe that it would be your job to educate your constituents as to the fact that there is great success in Scandinavian countries and across the globe? Sort of combat the corporately owned media propaganda?
Absolutely. You know, I know the facts too. It's not like I haven't studied them. We have the worst healthcare out of the 11 industrialized nations. We have the highest infant mortality. That was just on, I think, NBC News. I mean, our healthcare sucks unless you're rich. But our healthcare isn't as bad as our legal system. I mean, our legal system is totally crap.
thank you. And on legal system, since it's, I think most of our judge, if not all of them, elections are nonpartisan. How does one go evaluating a judge in order to vote properly?
Well, I believe probably you couldn't go wrong by not voting for an incumbent. But in Washington, we have a particular problem, and that is the judges only run in the primary. If nobody runs against them or they get more than 50% of vote, they pass on. So we know that most people don't vote in the primaries. So the judges pretty much get a pass and they're in office pretty much for life. And that's really inappropriate, given that they are the ones who, after the laws are made, interpret them and have a tendency to interpret them arbitrarily and capriciously, in my view.
And then what kind of policy would that take to solve some of that, locally or federally?
Well, locally, all you'd have to do is, and I think county auditors may have presented this to the legislature. All you have to do is change the law to make them run during the same election as everybody else, not give them the advantage of just winning the primary. That could do that. With the federal judges, we have a much bigger problem. We have judges appointed, they serve so long, they retire, they get a pension, and then they come back in and foist themselves on litigants, well, when they've already been replaced. And they act and they want people to consider them as if they're Article III judges who have tenure based on lack of misconduct, and they get a salary. But they get neither. They have to be reappointed every year by a member of the judiciary, which tends to put more power in the judiciary. And because they're getting a pension, they're working for free. So how would you like a judge to come in and say, well, I'm going to work on your case and no particular reason, I'm not working on any other cases? I mean, there's something scary about that. And that was one of the reasons for the Declaration of Independence, is a lack of independent judges. And we have that here now in the United States at this particular time in history, and it's getting worse. Like in the district court for the Western District of Washington, we're supposed to have 7 federal judges, Article III judges. We only have 4. We have 22 judicial substitutes that don't have the constitutional authority to be judges under Article III. I mean, and that's going on and on. And a lot of these judges, I don't know if you know it, but I think the oldest one just died. He was 104 years old. And how would you like some 104-year-old person to voice themselves on you as a litigant? I mean, it's really scary. And the thing is, they're not even getting paid. They say, we're volunteers and we're here to help you. Well, you know, they say there is no free lunch. I'm not so sure there's a free judge, and I'm sure they're being paid somewhere.
And can you, a litigant, is that someone who makes a decision as a judge? Can you explain that term?
Sure. A litigant is one of the people who's before the court. And that's another problem we have. Right now, about 75% of the people that go before the courts don't have an attorney. And the Washington Supreme Court has said, and I think in this case they're correct, they've said that there is no justice for these people. And one of the principles upon which this nation was founded is justice. I mean, in fact, it was the primary principle that this country would provide justice for the people. And that's not even in the cards now.
I have to say, Scott, that your alignment with the Sanders platform, what we would call progressive policies, is I'm confident in it. But what excites me beyond just your alignment with the progressive policy is that you have this extra knowledge, this extra passion that you're bringing to Congress. We can send someone with your knowledge of constitutionality, of law, nobody else is talking about judicial review or just judicial reform. So I think that in and of it, that is enough to be like willing to support your run, because it's exciting to have someone with extra. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And that's what we're trying to do is make it so more people get out there. So you don't have to have $1 million to run for office. If just one candidate can get elected this term or the next time, you know, who doesn't put any money up and, you know, is doing it for the people, and they can see that they really aren't trying to spoon feed them a bunch of stuff that isn't true. You know, it's pretty clear what I believe.
So what do you view as the biggest threat to liberty? Did we already talk about that? I just want to know what is your view on the biggest threat?
Judicial corruption.
Excellent. I thought we got
And
into
the
that.
debt slavery. I mean,
Please, yes, I wanted you to go into that. So yes, so describe what debt slavery is. Get into good detail.
Okay, so debt slavery is pretty much what most of us live in. I mean, when we had slaves back before the Civil War, I mean, the owners would take care of the slaves. They did have a lot of power over the slaves, but I mean, they would feed them, keep them healthy. They didn't educate them, but neither do we now. I mean, basically, if you can't earn a living, what they do is they allow you to die. They don't do it openly. When you look to find the data on how many people who have been evicted and are homeless die, you can't find it. But you know, when you go and look at the government reports, you can see real problems. For example, the government doesn't consider someone homeless until they've been homeless for a year. So what does that do to this 65-year-old lady who's thrown out in the street and dies very quickly? She's not counted, and they don't keep track of her. I mean, what do people actually think? And I mean, it's pretty obvious. What do we think when we're kicking young people and old people and vulnerable people out into the streets where they have no home? What happens to them? Obviously, many die. And as of 2013, we had over 30 million people that had happened to. So what happens when you have people that can't afford health care and they have disease or a problem and they can't get health care? I mean, obviously they die. The system is set up right now in a way that they are getting rid of many of us. And it's all about money. So one of the things that really bothers me most is I'm a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. My idea of practicing law is I want to aim for justice. But you can't aim for justice because you have to pay. You have to provide those you work with income. You have to pay rent. I mean, everything gets tilted. And too often our lawyers are more about, I spent so much time in school, I want to make a lot of money. And that's why 75% of the people can't get representation in courts. We've got to change that. We've either got to get rid of this adversary system that doesn't exist. We've got to out and out say, look, there's no adversary system here. If only one side gets represented and the judge listens just to that side. And we need to look at a way where we can get justice for the people. There's no way around it. We can't continue to think that we're a modern civilized nation when we make no attempt to provide real justice for the people.
What are your views on property rights, since we're talking about all this homelessness and people's, properties and everybody, not in my backyard stuff? So what's your overall?
I'm pretty pro property rights, and let me explain. I believe that like kicking people out of their property based on fraudulent deeds, and that kind of conduct is inappropriate. I believe that land use laws that restrict people from building small homes and homes off the grid are inappropriate. Now, that's a state law issue that I probably wouldn't get much to do with in Congress, but nonetheless, I still believe it's inappropriate. I believe our counties use a lot of these laws in order to fund themselves, and that's inappropriate because it goes against the life, liberty, and property of the people. So I am against a lot of that. I'm pro people's property, pro people's liberty, and that means that, so you sometimes get into collision courses there. So then what does that mean? How do I believe about the environment? I believe we have to protect our environment and protect other species. I mean, but there are ways that those can be accommodated. What the only reason they don't allow the small houses and places for people to live are not to protect species or the environment. It's so that they can make more money for the counties. I mean, the counties are one of our biggest problems. So I just filed a suit, or a mandamus is what it's called, with the Washington Supreme Court. And what we have found is that there was a law enacted back in 1907, which was 8 years after the ratification of the Washington Constitution. And basically what that law says is it was set up so people could protect their property against secret liens and hidden equities and fraud. And our counties stopped enforcing that with the help of Superior Court judges. I believe it was in the early 90s, but I mean, there's no showing they ever complied with it. We have to go back and we have to look at Secretary of State records, but they admit that they haven't complied with it since 2010, and yet they're kicking these people out based on these secret liens from MERS and hidden equities. I mean, and we have a law against it, and we had our county officials and our judges set themselves up so they could undo this law. And we know they know about the law because they've been trying to repeal it for the past few years. Now, and in trying to repeal it, they tell the legislature, look, it sets up that we have to have certain employees that we don't have. So they know that they're not complying, but they expect the people to comply. Shouldn't we have the judges and our officials comply with state law? I mean, it doesn't make sense that we have to, but they don't. And that's why our government is not working, because it's not of, by, and for the people anymore.
Oh, thank you for that. We have another question on Facebook from Christina Bengston. So LGBTQ and women's rights have not exactly been supported or furthered by the Republican legislative body. If you were to become a member of this body, would you fight for those rights?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Brian, Courtney? Oh, sorry.
I always have.
Yeah, I know you have. Thank you
No,
very much.
I just said yes, and I always have.
Yes.
And so, as it's phrased on the questionnaire, what restrictions on abortion do you think there should be?
I'm not sure. So if you start with Roe v. Wade, there's some problems with Roe v. Wade, and they're basically factual ones. Roe v. Wade was decided at a time when you had this trimester, the idea was the baby could not support themselves after a certain period of time out of the womb. And so the constitutional analysis was based on that. And that was a long time ago. And so the viability of a baby is now longer. Now, whether that was the correct constitutional analysis, that was the constitutional analysis, and it is infirm at that point. Nonetheless, as far as a woman's right to choose, I'm in favor of a woman's right to choose. I may well believe and probably should, and now again, I'm talking my beliefs, but I think that someone who's going to have an abortion ought to be aware of the consequences. So I don't necessarily have a problem with them being informed of the consequences before they make a decision. Now, does that mean I want them to see some horrifying movie? No. But does it mean that I think that life is sacred? Yes. But, you know, if I were asked to vote and my constituents agreed, I would, I'm pro-choice.
Excellent. And so with informed consent, basically, because every medical procedure, I've worked in healthcare, and I feel that every procedure should be fully informed. Every medical.
But the difference in this one is I think they have to inform about the kid too. It's not just informing the mother of the consequences to her, but maybe most of them already know, but the consequences to the kid. It's a very different situation than just what we're going to do to ourselves.
Okay.
But
and I think that since you're keen on having consensus from your constituents, that won't be a problem. I don't think that that's important. So like we disagree, but I believe your dedication to women's rights, the right to choose, whether or not we agree on the, if that level of information is good to have. And then, but I also believe you're dedicated to your community. And so your community, you would only vote differently than I would if your community supported you. So
that's right.
I do trust your dedication to that. And then I also trust your community to agree with me. So I'm at ease.
Well, I think the community does agree with you. I think the community does agree with you. And, I think that is a stance that I can support wholeheartedly. It's a tough question, and it's probably not going to be resolved in Congress. It's probably going to be resolved at the state level. And in fact, constitutionally, it may be required to be resolved at the state issue or state level.
Okay, interesting. And then I think that's off the top of my head where I'm at. Anybody?
Yeah, I wanted to ask. So right now, inequality, as far as you were referencing debt slavery, right, is at an all-time high. What are some solutions that you can present to fix this broken economy that we're in?
So if you go back to the time, and so the courts have pretty much, can you guys still hear me? Okay, it said that my internet was unstable. All right, so in the Dred Scott decision, it was the courts that tried to perpetuate slavery forever. And recently, they're doing the same thing. I mean, in the Henderson v. Santander case, it was the first case written by Justice Gorsuch, where he wrote the majority opinion. It said that the Fair Debt Collection Act did not apply to debt buyers, which meant that they can use kind of abusive debt collection practices against people. They didn't have to be the original creditor. And so the courts continue to take the side of the wealthy, the debt buyers, the bankers, and that's one of the biggest problems we have. So one of the things I would do is Congress has the ability under Article 3 of the Constitution to establish the jurisdiction and the parameters of the court's jurisdiction, and the courts are obligated to uphold the law. I would make very clear that debt collectors, and I would propose legislation that debt collectors cannot collect maybe more than 2-3 times what they have into a debt. What's happening now is debt collectors may pay pennies on the dollar, and then they go against homeowners and they evict them, or they go against people that have school debt, or they go against people that have debt, and the original creditor has already written it off, taken a big tax break. And so the person that is really hurt is us, the people. I would also look at, and I said earlier, about getting rid of the Federal Reserve. So it's kind of a long history, but to make it short, after the Civil War and after the women's suffrage, what happened was they stopped allowing us to gain more representatives. And what and the reason for that is because Congress was no longer having to raise taxes through apportionment. Apportionment not only described in the beginning how many House members you got, but the amount of direct taxes the states had to pay. So once the Supreme Court said that income taxes were direct taxes, they enacted a constitutional amendment that took it away from apportionment. So then what the federal government did was they created the Federal Reserve. Now, the reason they didn't apportion in 1920 was because in 1930, they had created the Federal Reserve, and now they could pass laws and they could finance it through debt, because we now have dollars that aren't really currency, that aren't really money, they're actually debt. So we go ahead and we finance everything through debt, which imposes interest on the people right from the beginning, and we pay that debt off with taxes. I mean, it's incredible when you think about what is really happening. So I would probably, I am predisposed to getting rid of the Federal Reserve and our debt-based currency. And you know, I believe that one of the big problems is we tried to make everything so cheap. Then, you know, we got rid of our middle class. The bankers gave them these loans that they can't possibly pay back. And they've been doing that for a long time. And we need to get back to having our people earn decent wages. And that may mean we need some tariffs. We may need some protection. I used to be a globalist. I'm not anymore. It has not worked out for the people. It's only worked out for the elites.
I really liked how you touched on that subject of the Fed and how actually taxes don't pay for spending. That's something very important that I think that we all need to start learning, and there's lots of people out there that are. So to kind of touch on that as well, to expand on that, the military, right? One of our biggest consumers of our everything at this point. What's your view on the military, and do you think that their budget is disproportionate?
Well, I think you know the answer to that.
Christina Bangstrom was asking.
We have 6.5. Okay. We have 6.5 times the military might than the rest of the world combined. I don't think we need to be spending our money on our military. We need, because we can defend ourselves, we need to be spending our money on our people, our veterans. You know, it's a for us in a lot of these wars that I consider kind of ridiculous. They don't do much to protect us. They do much to enrich the military industrial complex. But we don't take care of them. We don't take care of our people. Why are it's a large part of it's because we're overfunding our military.
I was actually reading a post last night from a friend of mine, Pam, on my Facebook page that she had volunteered, and there was an actual veteran that served in the Iraq War that lives in a tent outside of the hospital in downtown Seattle, Harborview Hospital, and he has a colostomy bag. And the only way that he can survive is by having a tent and going into the hospital every day. And it literally just, it's so heart-wrenching what we're doing to our veterans. And what would you do to be able to help our veterans?
I would take money that we are using on defense, and I would put the money, and of course it's not an I thing. I mean, I'm just one of 435, and I'd like to be one of about 6,000 congressmen that do this. But I think we need to change our economic priorities. I think we need, and you know, a lot of what has to be done is to undo the wrongs that have been done to our people by our government. I mean, I think we do need smaller homes, but I think these people, a lot of them were kicked out of their larger homes by fraudulent activity on behalf of the bank. I think we need to do something about that. I would like to see the bankers who and the banks who committed this fraud be held accountable. And I don't know how to do it under our current legal system, and especially with judges who don't want to hear about it and may actually favor the banks.
It doesn't seem like the banks are very much our friend anymore. What was that?
No, nor the debt buyers. Yes, the banks are not our friend, and the debt buyers are not our friend. I mean, this country's all about debt buying. We went from a society that made things and provided services to one that all we do is provide debts.
What do you think about a state bank? That's also a question from Christina.
I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of it.
Awesome. If single payer, this is from Tamara. We have another question. If single payer is enacted, what will your stance be on veterans and workers' compensation care? Should these programs be incorporated or not? I would also add, nope, she actually covered it with the workers' compensation. So yeah, what's your view on that one?
I am a strong advocate of injured workers, and I believe our system is failing them. I litigated on behalf of injured workers, and I've challenged the system. I believe that what we need is a universal health care. Yes, she'll take care of the medical needs of the injured workers. I mean, think about the costs. They have people in there fighting against the injured workers, and then those insurance companies, their executives make millions of dollars. I mean, we're spending a whole lot of money that should be spent on healthcare, on insurance. I'd like to see those insurance companies go out of business. And the compensation is the same thing. I mean, the grand pact for the injured workers was, we're not going to allow you to use the tort system or the court system, because we're just going to make sure that when you're injured, you're automatically paid. That has been breached, and it needs to be reinstated. We need to stop giving the wealthy the ability to skate on behalf of their responsibilities. And that's what we're doing, and we're doing that for the injured workers. They should get, as they were promised back when that system went into force, they should get immediate compensation and immediate health care. And what really tends to happen is it works for small injuries, but when somebody is really hurt at work, that's when they go into this fighting.
Yeah, as I've even been in the system too. I used to work at Boeing, and I've been through their workers' comp program, and it's just loops and roller coasters, and it's not very fun. And I would love to have that type of system.
And I just had a guy from Boeing call me recently. You know, we this idea of insurance that doesn't pay, you pay the premiums, but they don't pay to provide the benefits. I mean, we got to stop that. It's a stupid system.
Completely agree. One other thing I wanted to know is, so you're not financing your campaign, you're not accepting contributions. How do you plan on going up against one of the richest representatives in office in Washington State, and Susan DelBene and the Democratic Party? How are you going to go against that juggernaut?
Well, hopefully she would have the good sense not to be spending a whole lot of money when she knows that there's somebody else out there that I assume I'll still get to debate her. I assume that people in the district will know there's a candidate, and they can decide, do they want to hear her spoon-fed TV messages that she's going to tell them stuff that she's not really going to do, and I'm going to tell them stuff that I'm really going to do. I mean, and they can decide. The people have some responsibility to ensure that they're governed properly. And that's, I think, the only way we can do it. We can just show that the people that make all these promises, if they're not following up on them, I mean, why do we want them? I mean, we've got to call out the system for what it is. And it's a dishonest system that often elects dishonest people. And what we need in America is honest, moral leadership based on the people that try to help the people.
But it looks like we have some more questions in the audience. Did any of you want to take them, or would you like me to just keep going?
Well, I have a question. I haven't checked the audience questions lately, so but have we asked about campaign finance and anti-corruption?
No,
I
go
don't
ahead.
think-
We did in the previous thing, but not yet. Not in this. So go ahead.
Oh, well, where do you stand on money in politics? The issue of anti-corruption. Rhonda asked this question better.
I would like to see money out of politics, and that's why I'm doing what I am doing. I think in the United States, money controls everything, and I would like to envision a world in which it's not all about money, and you're faced with, if you don't want to play the game that they play it, you're not faced with death and poverty. I think that it is better for society as a whole if we don't allow sociopaths at the top who have a lot of money to determine, what our art is, what our politics are. I think that we, the people, need to take back part of our risk. We allowed everything to be about money because it wasn't at the time of our founding.
So do you believe in public elections then, setting like a start, this is when you get to start campaigning, this is when you end, you get this finite amount of money to make it more for the people? And then are you also, what do you think about ranked choice voting or like a star voting system instead of just our top two?
I like ranked choice voting. Whether or not, I don't know that I like the top two primary system we have. I don't see any reason why we couldn't have a general election and then have a runoff. I would be in favor assuming we're going to be stuck with money for a long time, I would be in favor of each candidate getting a certain amount of money. Then you get, of course, into the freedom and liberty issues. I think the more appropriate thing is to try to run campaigns without the money. The problem is, we make everything about the election. So when I was talking about representation, it's about 2 years of service. And then you get, it's more about service to the people. When you make everything about election day, what you do is you make the person who wins the election, that's the most important in office rather than service. So as between the options that you mentioned, I would be in favor personally, and of course that whatever my constituents wanted, I would go along with, as long as it's constitutional, probably of everyone getting the same amount and going out there. But I really want to make sure that the people, because it's got to be about the people. If we want government by the people, for the people, it's really, we got to put a lot of faith in the people. And the people need to be looking at these things, and we need to make it available to them to understand where the candidates are coming from. I mean, the problem is candidates can tell you anything, but if they've got a record, you can see what they've done. Like Susan Dolbany's got a record. You can look at what she's done. I've got a record. You can look at what I've done, and it's got to be up to the people to make an intelligent choice as to who they think will best represent them. And have I answered your question adequately? Okay.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Oh, sorry, real quick. I wanted to get an audience question in. We have Chris here. I believe that we answered this question earlier, but he wants to know your stance on the Second Amendment.
My stance on the Second Amendment is that it's part of the Constitution, and I believe I'm pro Second Amendment. And I believe that it's necessary to protect the people from governmental tyranny. I am not necessarily opposed to some common sense restrictions, but I mean, there are some restrictions in place now. And you know, when you look at the kids going to school, I mean, they have a right to go to a school where they're not going to get shot. So I appreciate that. My concern is that I don't trust this government. And because of that, I support the Second Amendment. And based on history, they got rid of guns in Germany. They got rid of guns in China. I am pro Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says arms. It doesn't say guns. And so if you're looking at ways to protect the people against governmental tyranny, the question is how far you go. And it gets into, if you're going to do it as an academic exercise, it gets into, do we still want a constitution? Because there are many academics and judges that sometimes say, you know, the Constitution is irrelevant. I don't believe that, but I'm pro Second Amendment.
I have a question about that, Brian.
Yep.
I'm a PCO, and I would love to coordinate a precinct level militia. What do you think about like having an organized micro militia in each neighborhood?
I have no problem. I have no problem with that. I mean, guns are in the guns rights people say this, and I know it might sound like a cliche, but it depends on whose hands the guns are in, what how they're going problem with putting restrictions on mental illness with felons and common sense restrictions to protect innocent people against their use. My problem is I just don't trust the government.
Right. And then if there were proposals in gun to help reduce gun violence, like if some people say mandatory gun locks and stuff like that, maybe gun safes or classes, what do you think about socializing those things? Like if you're going to mandate something, a modification to our constitutional right, then we shouldn't have to pay for that accommodation. So would those classes be free? Would you like work towards that? Would that be a compromise that you would take? I don't even, some variation of that.
You're not coming through, but I don't have a problem with those things that you're talking about, where they have to have safeties and education and that sort of stuff. I mean, in order to exercise rights, oftentimes you have to be trained in how to handle those rights.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh,
your militia idea, I would be fine with.
Cool. Would you be willing to have taxpayer money like fund the education instead of adding a financial burden to me, which would reduce lower income people from exercising that right? Would you offer those classes for free?
I would support that personally, and I haven't really considered that, but it seems consistent with what I believe. And of course, if I were elected to Congress, I would listen to my constituents, but yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
I have another question from Christina Bangston. Can you speak to immigration reform? That's kind of a hot topic right now. What are your thoughts?
First of all, I support a legal pathway to citizenship. Second, I support the dreamers. But immigration becomes more, and has become recently, more troublesome to me because of the family issue. So I certainly support not taking away kids from their parents. But then when I look at what our courts are doing to the people who are lawfully in this country, they take away the kids from their parents with child protective services and with the courts actually, and they're incentivized to do so by the federal government. And they put these kids in foster homes where they're 5 times more likely to be abused. So I would like to see that when we're looking at the immigrant situation, we're also understanding that those same rights we want to give to people who may be here unlawfully, and I'm completely in favor of them, are given to people that were born here, to citizens and people that are lawfully here. And that's a part of my corruption against court campaign. Our courts take kids away from people, but certainly we need a path to legal citizenship. And it shouldn't be that hard a question, except that we have so many people here illegally, and they're here illegally not necessarily because of their own fault. I mean, a lot of them are doing jobs that US citizens won't do. I mean, the more I look at immigration, the more I realize that it's a complicated issue, and we want to make sure that we handle it in a way that we are looking at these same rights for our own citizens. I don't think we should sacrifice immigrants' rights or our own citizens, and I think we have the same problems, and I think the government is treating people, all people who don't have a lot of money, pretty much the same way.
I just want to jump in and make sure that you know your time. I see you do have an event coming up in Arlington you're supposed to be at by 7, and it's 6:24 now.
Yeah.
So I just want to be mindful of that. I don't know if you have another chance for another question.
Let me ask Mike, I can stay till about 20 minutes to 7.
Okay, so let's just get
So
the
I can
questions
say
in.
another 20 minutes if you want.
And then also within this live stream where people are putting their messages, I know you're really good at answering questions. So if we don't get them here, I know that you've been tagged in there. So if you don't mind checking back on those later and going ahead and answering those that we're not able to get through right here tonight. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Brian or Courtney. Sorry.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for coming here and answering all these questions. You know that we support you and we've endorsed you. We have every confidence that you're going to fulfill the constitutional of the Constitution and defend the people. And is what I want to know myself is that we don't really stand for one party or the other. Will you support progressives or what you feel is right when the vote comes time to do the right thing? Will you vote against party is what I'm basically asking you. Does it matter? Are you going to go with the Republicans or are you going to go with the right decision?
I'm going to go with the right decision. I stand before the people as a candidate for office, and I'm putting my views out there, my constituents, and I'm going to serve them, and I will do that. I will not, my commitment there is absolute, unless my constitutional oath is involved.
Right. Real quick, just on that note, just since we're right there, how are you going to be able to communicate with your constituents, do you think? What route are you going to be doing some live stream saying, hey, this is what's going on, I want to hear? And I mean, how open are you going to be for people to interact with you?
I think, yeah, the live streams are a good idea. I've also thought about, and I think there is some money provided, but having kind of offices and people in each of the communities where people can go. And I don't mind, I don't spend a lot of money. So I don't mind spending my salary to do that, because what I see it is a chance to help change the nation, to bring about more people. It shouldn't all be about money. It should be about people that get into Congress to help the people. We should go back to, and sometimes in our nation, our words have been better than our actions. We should be trying now to coincide our actions with the words of the Declaration of Independence, with the Constitution. Now's the time to do it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming on. Please tell people where they can find you if you need some help and give your whole spiel, and I think we'll close.
Was everybody done with questions? He's still got about 15 minutes left, so.
Let me check. I don't see any. Oh,
Courtney?
there is from Beresford.
Oh, I'll touch on one of my favorite subjects. One of the ideas we've been bouncing off of candidates is the idea of a caregiver's basic income. So I believe we talked about this in our interview, but a caregiver's basic income, if you're raising a child under, say, the age of 8, or an elderly or disabled person, or even just a short-term injury, that you don't have to juggle a job or jobs and the rest of your family while doing so, that you receive a caregiver's basic income that can also be accrue Social Security credit. So what?
Yes, I would support that.
Excellent. And then our agricultural systems are harming. They're harmful. Our main agricultural systems. One of the drivers of maintaining the systems we have are farm subsidies that primarily go to the 99%, which is really fixed businesses. I believe that small farms make up less than 1% of our farm community. So how would you go about, would you be willing to look at eliminating farm subsidies or realigning them to small farms, maybe biodiverse farms? Because the part of the harm of these mega farms is the agricultural impact of monocrops, a singular crop from fence post to fence post. I don't know if you're into agriculture, so I guess, is there a willingness to learn about ways to reform the system if you don't already know?
Yes, I am into agriculture. I come from Iowa, and I am aware of the problem with monocrops, and I have solicited help from small farmers in this area. And I'm very pro small farmer. I do not believe in corporate farming. I'm kind of one of those people that believe the land belongs to the people who steward it, not the corporations.
Excellent, thank you.
And that's one of the things in my district that is very important. We are, I mean, most of the population is in King County, so they do a lot of the electing, but the rest of the district is pretty agricultural, and I have taken steps. I do this radio show, and one of the things we've looked at is organic farming and the issues they face, as well as the big farming. And so we've been, that's an issue that I'm very concerned about. I will need help. And that's one of the things I'm talking about doing with my district, is soliciting the kind of help I need, because I'm not a farmer, but I am very interested in it.
Excellent, thank you. And then where do you stand on cannabis, be it marijuana or hemp?
I'm pro cannabis, hemp, and marijuana. I would vote to take it off any schedule. I would, and I believe it can be a great crop for agriculture. And so I'm in favor of industrial hemp. I'm in favor of marijuana, and I'm against big drug companies trying to take it over and use it as a way to bilk more money out of citizens.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that last part. That's a perfect addition.
Also, would you add on to their decriminalization federally for all of the people that have been charged with the petty crimes? Okay.
Yes, and like I said, I'm in favor of releasing those folks from jail. So I mean, I'm about as pro cannabis, I think, as you can get.
I think so too. Did anybody else have anything else?
we have an electrical grid that's out of date, and I'm going to milk this interview for all you got. We have an electrical grid that's out of date, and it's really broken into 3 categories: East and West and Texas. So what do you think about breaking that into smaller districts and greening the infrastructure as much as possible, maybe security and checks and balances, so that one switch doesn't kill it all?
You know, I'm not sure I know enough about what you're saying, but in general, I'm in favor of green energy. I'm in favor of houses being able to be off the grid, and wind, solar. I am in favor of whatever we need to do, and creating smaller districts. I'm a big fan of local communities. I believe that it would be better if regulations were through local communities networked together rather than coming on high from the federal government or the United Nations. I think that local communities know what's best for them, and we should give them the ability, unless there's an absolute necessity for it to be decided at the national level, it should be decided at the local level.
Thank you. I used to think that I was 51% Federalist and 49% states' rights. But over the years, I feel like I've evened out to 50-50, because I like to think that the federal government is the tide that rises all ships, while the state and the districts within it are most optimized to self-govern. Do you find yourself to be a Federalist or a statist?
You know, it depends. It depends on the issue. Like, for example, there's certain things like discrimination often is a statewide problem, and the feds have to come in. So I think for the most part, and I've had a lot of legal cases where I argue these things, and oftentimes it depends upon the client, the way I argue them, so I get to see it from a whole lot of different aspects. I think I'm probably lean more towards states' rights and like to keep the federal government out of like safety and welfare for local communities. Like the building codes, they come from the United Nations. Why? I mean, why are we having local building codes based on the United Nations? Some people may know about Agenda 21. I have become much less infatuated with globalization, because that is really about the bankers and the wealthy elites trying to control the world. And I don't think they have the ability, mental ability, to do so in a way that will protect the peoples and species of the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I like the federal rules to kind of like be protections, and that everybody deserves, and then local stuff is like the fine tuning of what their community.
I can go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Thanks. Well, we have 2 minutes left, so if you'd like to give us any final thoughts, a little bit where to find you, what kind of help you need, and all the goods.
Well, I just hope people will take the time to listen to my positions and vote for the people they think that will make a difference. I think I can, but it's up to you. I stand here asking you for your vote. I'm not out there campaigning because I got another job and I have to represent clients. But, you know, if you want someone that will work for the people in the way in which I'm talking, I'm there to do it. And we need to find others that will do it too, because we need a nation of citizen legislators if we're going to expect them to work for the people. They've got to come from the people, and they've got to commit to work for the people. And if they don't do that, then they shouldn't be elected. And it's up to your job. It's your job as citizens to pick out the fakers. And it's not that they agree with everything you say. It's that, you know, you trust them.
Yep.
And I guess I do have to get going. But I want to thank you guys for having me on.
And can we find you at scottstafne.com? What's your email, or what's your website?
Well, Micah, what is our, I think it's Scott Stafne for Congress, and my work email is scott@stafnelaw.com, and my cell phone is in the voter's guide, so you can call me, and many people have. And, you know, sometimes I'm busy and I got a brief too, but when I can talk, I do. And I want to talk to people. That will be one of my first tasks if I get elected, is setting up a system so how we can communicate.
Excellent.
Thank you again. Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Rhonda.
Thank you again, Scott, for coming on and answering these questions. There's a lot of talk out there, which is good, right? We need to delve into who we're going to be voting for. So I thank you for joining us again for answering all these questions, and thank everybody out there for also joining in and participating. It's a pleasure. So I will end this live stream now, and we'll see you guys later.